Thank you, Madam Chair, and I too want to welcome the former chair of this committee, Senator Frank Murkowski, and welcome him back to the hearing room, and also welcome our witnesses and thank them for being here today. Today's hearing is an important opportunity, as the chairwoman said, to learn about the critical issues of the energy world, the relationship between terrorism and global oil networks, and foremost about energy security. I look forward to hearing the witnesses, and I look forward at some point in time having the administration be a witness here as well. Perhaps we can do that in the future, or have a hearing in a secure room to get into even more detail on this issue. But it is something I think we need to hear from them on. At the outset of the hearing, I want to make sure that I'm making my views known about how important global oil markets are in fighting terrorism, and particularly the role of this committee to consider the impacts of these activities on infrastructure, the risks for U.S. and global energy security and supply, and understanding the global picture. Iran and Iraq have some of the largest oil reserves in the world, by some estimates, fourth and fifth largest in the world, and so control over this oil has a major impact on global supplies and prices of oil. Overall, the movement of oil from the Middle East to world markets is also key to the stability of global supplies. Global energy security depends on diversity of supplies in different countries, but what happens to that oil from the largest reserve still matters, because in addition to the United States, growing countries like China have an enormous energy need, and they will continue to look for resources for those energy needs to be met. In today's market, where there is robust supply, it would take a significant disruption, maybe somewhere on the magnitude of 5 to 10%, to really disrupt the market. To give that a sense of perspective, today's global production is approximately 94 million barrels per day, and the ISIS oil production is about 35,000. So that's somewhere between less than 1/10 of 1%. So it is clear, though, that this is a constantly shifting dynamic, and in a tight market, a very, very small amount of disruption can have a very, very significant impact. So I think today's discussion are about where and when we might anticipate disruptions and what to do about them. And as I predict, we'll probably talk a lot today about actually following the money of where the oil revenue is going as a way to fight ISIS. In yesterday's Armed Services Committee hearing, Defense Secretary Ash Carter laid out the administration's strategy in degrading ISIS's oil infrastructure. He said, quote, "Because of improved intelligence and understanding of ISIL's operations, we've intensified the air campaign against ISIL's war-sustaining oil enterprise, a critical pillar of ISIL's financial infrastructure. In addition to destroying fixed facilities like well and processing facilities, we've destroyed nearly 400 of ISIL's oil tankers, reduced the major source of its daily revenues, and there's more to come," end quote. Well, we'll certainly look forward to hearing more about what is to come, and I will be first to say we do need to do more. According to Secretary Carter, what made the recent strategy possible was new intelligence that had previously not been available. He said, quote, "It allowed us to identify those parts of the oil infrastructure that are being used to actually fund ISIL." I recently was briefed by a State Department Special Envoy for Energy, and I was pleased to hear that over the past year, we've eliminated almost all of ISIS refining capacity. I was also pleased to hear that the raid on the home of former ISIS oil emir Abu Sayyaf in May produced actionable intelligence about that following the money and more effective targeting of that. Whereas previously ISIS could repair the damage from airstrikes within a matter of days, the current targeting inflicts damage that will take many months, even a year, to repair. And another piece of news is that ISIS no longer controls any of the fields in Iraq. So while progress has been made, it is very important to understand how adaptable ISIS is, and that's why it is important for us to adapt too. It is clear that ISIS adapts their strategies, and they have continued to look at this as a main resource, so we need to act swiftly and decisively as well. ISIS is supported by fuel purchases by the Assad regime. To me, that needs to end. One of the most troubling realities of the situation is that the ISIS oil is being purchased by their enemy, the Assad regime, either paying cash or other means. In fact, the U.S. Treasury recently sanctioned a Syrian individual for facilitating oil purchase from ISIS. So instead of focusing on alleged oil smuggling in Turkey, Russia needs to use its influence to stop Assad regime from buying oil and gas from ISIS. So I know Secretary Kerry is traveling there today. Maybe that's a conversation that he can have. But back to our larger issue here. The large and troubling issue is that for years, terrorist organizations have been funded through oil sales. The chairwoman just mentioned a few of those incidents in her statement. In Nigeria, for example, the oil has fueled conflicts since 2005, and Boko Haram, the group that bombed the United Nations building in Nigeria, capital, and kidnapped 270 schoolgirls and killed over 10,000 people, is likely funded through the crude oil theft and sales. Nearly 40% of the U.S. oil demand is met by oil, and 93% of transportation is fueled by oil. So I also think it's important, given these fact that these terrorists target these organizations, we need to continue to diversify our economy in the interest of national security. In the past, roughly 6% of our nation's GDP goes to purchasing petroleum. 40 years ago, we created the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to prevent the economic security impacts of crude oil disruptions. And the chairwoman and I remain committed to making sure the Strategic Oil Reserve is a strong asset for our nation. We recently worked to make sure that the Quadrennial Review's identification of infrastructure investment needed for the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, given the shift change that we've seen in the United States over our resources and where they are, that those investments need to be made. In the 2005 budget agreement and the transportation bill, sales of the SPRO were authorized, and the SPRO needs to be protected from further shredding. It's very important that we have this as a resource for us to protect against instability in oil markets. So while I'm sure we're going to hear a lot of discussion today from our panelists about the larger implications of national security and our dependence on oil, we need to continue to make sure that we are doing everything here at home to make sure that we are secure and that we are isolated to the greatest degree possible from these impacts on our economy. And I thank you, Madam Chair, and again, I look forward to hearing the witnesses.